Well, hello again, fellow travelers. Today on Streets and Eats, we are on episode 77, and we're going to be telling you how to visit the amazing Channel Islands.
Well, that's not the Channel Islands that are off the coast of California.
No, these are the Channel Islands that are a British protectorate off the coast of France, actually.
And you may have heard of them, Jersey and Guernsey, and there's I think 4 or 5 more, Sark, and I don't know all the names of them. But they were very popular a few years ago when there was that movie that came out.
The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society.
And who doesn't want a potato peel pie?
Welcome to Streets and Eats, the travel and food podcast dedicated to taking our listeners to the sights, sounds, and flavors of fascinating places near and far, both on and off the beaten path. We're Jim and Corinne Vale, and we've been traveling internationally and domestically together for decades, visiting more than 90 countries in all 50 states in the USA. We'll share all of the local knowledge and food expertise we've gathered through years of living as expats in Asia and Europe, as well as traveling with families spanning multiple generations around the world. Join us each week for a new adventure. Okay, it's time for your favorite part of the podcast, the trivia question.
Let's see who can get it right before me. Probably all of you.
I don't know. I think I'm going to stump everybody on this one. I mean, you'll have the basic idea, but let's see. Okay, so one thing that makes researching the Channel Isles so difficult, at least for me, was that New Jersey often comes up first in the searches.
Which makes sense. I mean, there's a lot in New Jersey, and it's the United States, and it's a big state. It's not a big state size-wise, but it's a big state population-wise.
Sure.
Whereas Jersey Island in the UK and the Channel Islands in between, France and England, not so big.
Yeah. So Jersey as a keyword, more likely to come up with New Jersey than the Channel Island.
But you do come up with Jersey cows, which originated on
Jersey Island.
Jersey
Island.
Island.
That's not my question.
Okay.
So here's my question. What is that connection? Why is it New Jersey? How did it get its name?
Well, I can only imagine that the way New Jersey came up with its name from Old Jersey, which is the original Jersey, which is Jersey Island, is from the cows.
Oh, that's a good guess, especially since it's also the Garden State.
Especially since it's a garden state?
Yeah, well, I mean, cows and gardens. But no, that's not how it got its name, because I don't know if there are Jersey cows, how far back they were actually called Jersey cows, but I think that's probably a newer thing. No, but you probably, after visiting the islands, you probably have an idea of the connection just because of some of the history we learned while we were there, which was that as a protectorate of the crown, when England went through its civil war, the people on Jersey Island were one of the few of the British Isles people to recognize King Charles II as the rightful king of England, even though he wouldn't be for another, 8 or 9 years while the Civil War raged on.
And he did live there. And in fact, we saw some of his bedrooms in the castle and some of his even underclothes. They kept some interesting things.
So the connection is that right there. Because of their loyalty to the king, when he did become king again after Oliver Cromwell died, he wanted to recognize and reward Jersey for being so loyal to him all that time. So he gifted some American colonies to the island's bailiff at the time, which was Sir George Carteret, who is also very famous on the islands still to this day. And because of that, George called his land New Jersey.
Okay.
I thought that was a pretty good question.
Okay.
I mean, it's not exciting. I could have come up with something about the cows or the potatoes.
Which I like the cows, by the way.
But everything would have been really obvious. So I wanted to come up with something a little
obscure. So I couldn't get it.
That's right. Okay. Well, you mentioned the Potato Peel Society. And for a lot of people, that might very well be their first introduction to the Channel Isles.
I think it was even not necessarily for me. I'm sure I'd heard about them before, but I never really thought about them before. But once that movie came out, which I really enjoyed the movie, it was something that kind of made me want to go there. But then also we went to St. Malo.
Yeah.
And when we went to St. Malo, this is a few years ago, St. Malo is this gorgeous town right on the border of France, right on the channel.
Right on the coast.
And we saw there were ferries to the Channel Islands from there. And that really piqued my interest.
Yeah.
And since then, I've been really wanting to go. I think if you haven't been to St. Malo in France, it's a must do because it is one of those, I mean, it's just drop dead gorgeous. The food is delicious. And it's the gateway to the Channel Islands from the continent, not from the England side.
Right. And that's when I'd heard of the Channel Islands. I'd heard of Jersey and Guernsey, but didn't really know anything about them. And then when we, like you said, when we were in St. Malo, I saw a ferry to Jersey.
Right.
And that's when, for me, the wheels started clicking. It wasn't until much later that I saw the movie or heard about it. But as with so many places in the world, when I see a ferry that goes somewhere, I automatically want to go there.
We are ferry people, aren't we?
Yeah. We talked a little bit about what and where it is. It is a British protectorate, a protectorate of the crown, a bailiwick, as they call it.
A biggywick?
A bailiwick.
A bailiwick.
Yeah. So as a crown dependency, it's not actually a country. It's not like one of the countries in the United Kingdom. It's not in the European Union. It is its own like really unique entity. Well, the two of them.
Well,
Guernsey
not just the two
and
of them.
Jersey. They're separate.
All the Channel Islands.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean Jersey's completely separate than Guernsey
Right.
as well?
They're both separate bailiwicks, but the same basic governmental setup and connection to the crown. You mentioned the other islands. It's Jersey, of course, Guernsey, Alderney, Sark, and Herm are the ones that you can actually get to by boat, visit. There's probably some smaller ones in the archipelago, but those are the main ones. And their connection to the crown goes back pretty far, like before Charles II in the 1600s. It goes back to their connection to Normandy when they were part of the Duchy of Normandy, which most people will realize is actually that part of France where St. Malo is, in that area of France. So the islands, being as close as they are to France, were
French.
And when William the Conqueror from Normandy conquered England and set himself up as the king of France and England and Ireland and everything, they became, of course, part of that kingdom. And then eventually the French reclaimed their land, but part of the agreement for them to have Normandy was that they could have Normandy for the French, but the British would keep the Channel Islands.
Cool.
I like that. So they're just off the coast from France. They're actually much closer to France than they are to England.
But you can take a ferry there. That's how we got there. You can either fly or take a ferry. Or I guess if you had your own boat. Or if you were really strong and you want to swim, go for it.
You do hear about people swimming
The channel.
Right? I don't know if that's where they swim it. It's a pretty wide point at that point.
I can't imagine swimming the channel after having just recently been on a boat over the channel. And it was pretty choppy on one of our rides, especially. No, thank you.
No, thank you. Me too. Okay. So yeah, getting there. Yeah. By sea, ferry is probably the most common way to get there.
And probably the cheapest way.
I think so.
Even though there are flights.
Yeah, especially if you want to visit more than just one of the islands.
Right.
Because getting between them can be difficult by air. So there are flights. The cheap flights to Jersey are out of Gatwick or Luton by EasyJet. And you can get those, if you're lucky, around 50 euros or 50 pounds, I guess. Otherwise, like when we were looking at flights and trying to decide between flying and driving and taking the ferry, the flights were all in the 200 to 300 range per person. So that was pretty pricey. And that would just get you to one island.
I was going to say, and then that only gets you to one island. And then you still have to get to the other island, which you could easily take the ferry between islands. It's not a problem. You could do that and then fly out of the other one if you were taking one-way flights. So that is a way to do it if you want to get there faster. But I like taking a ferry. So,
yeah.
I mean, it wasn't really much of a question for us. We knew there was a ferry and we were going to take it.
And by the time that you get done waiting at the airport and getting there early and getting through security and everything else, it ends up being a full day of travel anyway, even for a short flight.
And the difference is when you're on a boat, I'm on a boat. No, when you're on a boat, then you can move around. I mean, there was a couple of restaurants on the boat. There was a store. Plus, you can go to all the different decks. There was a little movie theater for the kids and a place for the kids to play. To me, it's just much more easy to enjoy your time as opposed to being, sure, on a flight, you get there quicker, but you're sitting.
You're sitting in a tin can.
Right.
Yeah. And you can get outside, breathe the sea air. look for sea animals. I think I saw a dolphin once, but it was pretty far off in the distance. So the views are much better. So going by sea is really
what we recommend.
That's what we recommend. It's what we did. Ultimately, we rented the car at Gatwick, did a whole drive around England, but then spent a good week going out to the Channel Islands and onto Jersey, and then on to Guernsey, and then back to the United Kingdom.
I do want to make a note of that. When we were booking the ferry, we knew we were going to have a car, but we didn't have the car yet because we booked the ferry before we got the rental car.
Good point.
And one of the things they ask you when you're booking the ferry with a car is what your license plate is.
You can't leave it blank. What I did was I put the word rental in place of it, and it took that. Anyway, we didn't have any trouble. It worked out just fine for us. But that was a little bit disconcerting at first because we weren't sure if that was going to work, but it did. Yeah. So Condor Ferries is the company that goes between the Channel Islands and the United Kingdom. And then also it goes to St. Malo in France. So that's pretty much the only option for ferry. I guess they have a lock on it. It's not too expensive. If you're just going to go by foot from the UK, there's two choices, Portsmouth or Poole. Poole is the closer option. And for a foot passenger, about 40 euros, depending on when you make your reservations. If you're short notice, it could go much higher. Or if it's a very popular travel date, it can get higher. And for a car, it can get as low as £100, and then you pay for any passengers. But with a car, the driver goes with that fare. So £100, that's actually pretty good to take your car on a ferry to the island. And then another 90 to get to Guernsey from Jersey, and then another 100 to get back. So if you can get the cheapest prices, you're looking at around £400 with a passenger.
So it's not super, super cheap. It's probably not the cheapest way to get there. I think flying actually might turn out to be a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, if you can get that cheap flight out of London. If you can get the
cheap flights.
For sure. Otherwise, not.
But the ferry was really, really nice and we enjoyed it.
Okay, so some last tips, I guess, about the ferry. I would recommend you go shopping before you get on the ferry, especially for the longer one.
Absolutely.
From the UK to the islands.
Gosh.
The food on board was not that good. They had food, so you won't starve. It wasn't overpriced, I didn't think, but it wasn't that great.
The snacks were okay. I mean, if you just want to munch,
chips or crisps,
then it's no problem. But if you want an actual dinner, I mean, it's very easy to get something before you get on the ferry, anywhere that you are, or you can make like a picnic lunch or something to go on.
Yeah. So that's the first thing. The other thing is when you're looking at getting your car, if you're renting, you have choices, right? I recommend going with a small car because size matters as far as the cost goes. So the cheapest cost is for a car that's under 6 feet and less than 16 feet long. We had a little Fiat 500.
Which for the two of us was more than adequate.
Exactly. It held the small amount of luggage that we had and got good gas mileage. And of course, we got the cheapest fare on the ferries. But even more than that, when it came time for parking or driving around the islands, it was a very good option because it was so small. It could get into small parking spaces. And when we talk a little bit more about getting around on the islands, we'll talk a little bit more about why a small car was really helpful.
I think in general, small cars and anything to do with England and hedgerows and, small windy roads is always a good idea. Because I would say the same thing for England proper is a small car is good because we've been on some tiny, tiny, tiny thin roads where it's only a one lane and you have to either back up or pull over on where they have a little turnout or
little pullouts
or, pray
or pray or do a lot of backing up. We did some backing up.
We did
because that's the driving situation. Well, let's move on to getting around. We've talked about how to get there. So getting around, we drove pretty much everywhere we went.
We could have taken a bus.
Yeah. I'll talk a little bit about the buses, but the driving conditions on both Jersey and Guernsey, I thought were pretty easy for an American driver, I guess, someone who's not used to driving on the left-hand side of the road. Really wasn't bad because most of the roads were like one lane. So you were in the middle of the road no matter what you wanted to do anyway. So you didn't really have that to worry about.
The problem was you had to always be really aware of what's coming from the other direction because there's only so many pullouts.
Yes.
So where is the nearest pullout? Do they have the pullout? Do you have the pullout? Are they going to pull over and try and park so you can get by, or are you going to do the pulling over? So, and that gets a little bit, what's the word? It gets a little bit, annoying. Wearing, because you really have to be, on top of things, aware the whole time you're driving. It's doable. And there's not that many people on the roads. And a lot of times they're going the same direction as you. But even still, I mean, there were plenty of times where we had to back up a good, 100 feet, 200 feet or whatever, or someone else did. And you do get into the mode of looking enough ahead. So then it's like, oh, there's a car. Let me pull over right away. So that's always good.
And keeping track of what you've passed as far as the pullouts and knowing, okay, there is a car coming. I had to pull out back a little bit. I could back up to that. It looks like they have a pullout up ahead. And you there's like this unspoken dialogue that goes on between the cars approaching each other as to who's going to pull out. And I'm sure there's maybe a written rule for it, but it tends to work. And because that's just the way it is, it was never really an issue as far as in the States, people would get raging at you if you got in their way. It just happens so often, right? But it's just the way it is. And we never encountered anybody. We always waved and smiled as they got by. And it worked out. It was
fine. It was fine.
And it's really a good way to get around the island and see all the scenery. You can stop wherever you want if you have your own car. That last day, you really wanted to see the Jersey cows, right? And we had seen some in a couple places, but we never really had a good chance to get out of the car and take photos and just pet the cows, so to speak. So we were able to do that with our own rental car. We drove off on some small side roads. We saw some cows up on the hill.
And we went chasing them. Of course you could ride bikes. Neither island is that huge that you can't really ride bikes around it. Now, you're not going to do the whole island in one day.
Yeah.
But if you strategically plan it, bikes are a really good way to go because the islands, there are some hills, but
a good e-bike will tackle those hills.
I mean, I don't think it would be a big problem. And of course, you can take the bikes on the ferry as well for much cheaper than if you take a car. We saw people doing that.
On Jersey, I would say one of the biggest obstacles for driving was the bikes. And you just got behind some bikes and you waited. But they seem to be more, on Jersey, they seem to be more like sports bikers, sports bicycling, like teams and things like that. Whereas on Guernsey, there's a lot of bicycles as well, but they seemed more like just people getting around, getting to the different places, locals going from their home into town or tourists going to different sites. And it worked really good on Guernsey for that. So a bicycle is a really good way to get around too.
But they do have a good bus system on both islands. They have a really good bus system. And I mean, there's a variety of different fares that we'll put on the page, but basically, you don't have to worry about getting picked up or anything like that. We saw tons of buses. We saw lots of people getting around the island that way, and it never seemed to be a problem. For us, I mean, we're those type of people that like to stop in the middle of nowhere and take photos and stuff. But not everybody's like that. I mean, if you had a bike, you could do that. If you had a motorcycle, a lot of people took motorcycles there. And then, of course, there was a fair amount of people that just walked on the ferries and then they took public transportation from there, which you could easily do. And it was pretty inexpensive, I think.
Yeah. You could get from point A to point B for about £2 on either island. And that would get you to a spot you needed to go to. Or if you sprang for a day pass, it kind of seemed like the same pricing structure that you see around the world. If you're going to be taking more than 3 rides in one day, then the day pass is going to be profitable, the best way to do it. If you're not going to be doing that much, then I would just go with single fares. And in both of the islands, you can buy your ticket right on board the bus or buy your day pass right on board the bus too. So super easy, really good way to do it. I think every single site that we visited, there was a bus stop right at that site.
Oh, yeah. we saw buses everywhere we were. So it unlike other places where people say, sure, just take public transportation. But the public transportation doesn't really get you to the site. Unlike those places, everywhere we went, everywhere. I mean, out to
everywhere, every site.
Just the littlest things. There was a bus stop there. And not just a bus stop, close, but a bus stop at the place where you were going to park anyway.
Even the Devil's Hole. It was the Devil's Hole. Most remote one that I can think of.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of too, as the most remote. But really, everywhere you went. So the bus is a very viable option. And we may not have taken a car if we'd known that. But, I mean, we had the car, so there's no reason not to take it. And I think the bike would be if you really like to ride, that's fine too.
Yeah, so I think a really good way to do it, of course, I think the best way to do it is to have a rental car. But
that's because we always like to drive.
That's what we like to do. So that's what I always say is the best way to do it. It gives you the most flexibility and the most control. It's a little bit more expensive. And you don't get wet. And you're dry. That's right. Not that
I don't believe it rained on either island while we were there.
We had gorgeous weather the whole time.
We did have beautiful weather. However, it could easily rain. We're talking the Channel Islands here.
Well, that's one thing they say about them. You can get every kind of weather all in the same day.
Yeah.
But
we were super lucky.
So you could also go on as a foot passenger on the ferry, go to St. Helier, get off, have a hotel somewhere in St. Helier in the capital, and just take buses around the island for a couple of days, go all to the sites, get on the ferry to Guernsey as a foot passenger again, stay right there in St. Peter Port, foot traffic around the city. It's very walkable. It's a little hilly there, but it's still pretty walkable. Buses out to all the sites. And then when you're done and a couple of days have passed, ferry back to the mainland.
Where you could have parked your car.
Yeah, where you could have parked your car in a long term.
Or taken the train.
Or taking the train from London. So that is a good way to do it. I think you'd save a little bit of money that way. But I mean, we talked about the differences. Okay, my favorite part about travel, of course.
Talking to locals. We love to do that.
And we did meet some characters on that trip.
I think the most notable character that we met, the most fun person that we met, actually, I met him first.
Yeah.
We got to one of the museums on Guernsey, and it's on a little island, but there's a jetty all the way out to the island. So it's not completely an island. I don't know how you would describe it, I guess. But so we get out there and it's like, you need to turn around and buy your tickets across the road because we don't sell tickets here. We don't have any cash. If you have a card, I think they took card.
No, you could buy the ticket there with cash. And we could have done that, but he quickly talked us into buying the multi-pass.
Yeah, which
we didn't have enough cash for that.
Actually.
So I had to go back across the causeway and up to the store where they sold the tickets with credit cards. And meanwhile, he was really friendly. He's nice. He said, he tells you, oh, go on into the museum, check it out. Well, he's getting the tickets. It's no problem. So I'm like, okay, she's going to be done with the museum and you have to wait for me when I get back. So I go across the causeway.
Which I would have been, but he was a talker.
But I go across the causeway. I get the tickets. I come all the way back. It's like 10 minutes.
I haven't
He
even
is still
moved.
Talking to her.
But he was fascinating. And he was from Guernsey. His family had been from Guernsey. And he was telling us about his experience during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just a child at the time. Was he even there or was it his parents?
His parents. He was a child later in the house that they had moved into.
Anyway, he, of course, was, especially because of the movie we mentioned, everybody goes to Guernsey for a World War II story. So he was up on his World War II history and he says he's going to start a podcast. So keep your eyes open for that. World War II history of Guernsey kind of podcast. He was very interesting and he told us about his family and about his aunt who, I guess, had an affair with a Nazi while they were being occupied. And then his mother who fell out with some parts of the family. So they all had to go, they were going to get on the boat to leave because they had evacuated people right at the beginning. But they didn't get on the boat because the boys' school had priority. I mean, he told us story after story after story, and I found him to be super fascinating. I really enjoyed talking to him. But meantime, I'm getting all this information and like more information than I was ready for. Like I wanted to take notes and I wanted to say to the guy, okay, stop. I'm going to start taking some notes here. But I didn't. I just politely listened. And then when Jim came back, he was done. He's like, okay, your husband's back. I don't need to talk to you anymore.
So we did. We went to the museum and we came back out. And but that's also where we got the story of the potato peel pie and the significance of the potato peels.
Yeah.
Because we didn't really know that.
Because, you know, when you watch a movie and they name it something, okay, they do kind of explain it in the movie that they made this, you know, as wartime and they didn't have very
food.
much. So things were rationed. We all get that. And one of the things they were able to do was make a potato peel pie. Well, as it turns out, he had the reason for that. What happened was in the early days of the war, when the Germans were doing quite well and they were occupying the islands, they would peel their potatoes and they wanted them to be rectangular. They wanted straight edges.
So they can make good French fries.
Yes.
They
left a lot of the actual potato attached to the peel. Not like we're thinking of today where you use a potato peeler and you're basically just getting the peel off, the skin off. Back then, they basically had almost a whole chunk on all the sides of the potato so they could make nice square cuts. And so these became very popular because the people, you know, rationing and wartime, they were hungry. So his mother was able to get some of those. And he was telling us the story of that. And it was pretty interesting.
Really fascinating.
So we enjoyed that.
The potato peels. And they had enough on them that they could actually get food out of them, or they could plant them and grow potatoes in the future.
And one thing that was really funny was he was very into the movie that was made. And maybe everybody was, but he was the one that was most vocal about it. And his daughter even bought the house where it's in one of the scenes, or the gate by her house, you know, where they go. During the movie, they go under this wooden archway and her house is right there. And so he was just so proud that she was able to get a property that was in the movie, basically.
Yeah. Okay, so the segue here. Yeah, we love meeting people. And we met a lot of characters like that. But what we really love is the food.
Always.
So, and, you know, the potato peel pie kind of leads right into one of the most famous foods on Jersey Island anyway, is the Jersey Royal.
Which is a new potato.
Yeah. And it's harvested between May and July. And if you're in a self-catering apartment type thing and you want potatoes, all you got to do is get out on the country roads. You're going to find what do they call them? Honesty boxes.
Well, you know,
farm stands.
They have them all over the United States as well on the East Coast. I'm pretty much every place we've ever been. But there were so many of them on Jersey and Guernsey. Like you could get anything. You could get flowers and milk and butter and, of course, any kind of vegetables and lots of eggs, of course, which I think are the most popular thing to get nowadays anyway, are eggs, because everybody wants to raise chickens.
Royal potatoes that's the best way to get them. Now, we were there in August, so I think the harvesting season was over, but we did have Jersey Royals in a couple of dishes in some restaurants, but it's a small new potato. So I think the best way is like salted and boiled.
Of course.
And adds plenty of butter.
I think what they're most famous for, though, is their dairy, like the Jersey cows.
Yeah, the Jersey cow, of course.
One of the funny stories that the guy told us about at the museum was that they evacuated, of course, Guernsey to the UK, to England. And when they got to England, they were just like, they saw black and white cows for the first time. And they were like, what are those things? They had never seen a black and white cow. They didn't even really know they existed, because on Jersey and Guernsey, all the cows are those brown and white models.
That's right. Well, and the Jersey cow is that really beautiful brown velvety cow with a dark face, really cool looking cow. And on both islands, the cows are known for their dairy. They're milk producing. They don't have beef cows really necessarily.
No, but it's funny too, because we think of dairy cows. We also think of cheese. They didn't produce any cheese. And I just think,
I don't know
especially having been on the French border, you would think
right?
cheese would be a big thing, but no. They have milk and they have butter and they have butter and they have milk.
The butter is really good.
The butter is delicious.
It's like the best butter in the world. And what I thought was really interesting was you would get pretty much with every meal, you get a little like white ceramic crockery tub of butter with a nice new label stuck on top for Jersey butter or Guernsey butter, whatever it happened to be.
I'd never seen butter served that way before.
Ever.
And so I had to ask because I just ask stupid questions all the time. And I said to the guy, now, when you guys are buying your butter, are you buying these crockery dishes to serve the butter in? Like, is that how you buy them for the restaurant? Or are you taking this big mound of butter and putting them in and then sticking a label on top? And that's actually how they do it.
And just reusing those.
And reusing the
crockery.
ceramic things. But it was pretty cool. I'm sure we have a picture of it and we'll post it. But I thought that was unique. I've never seen that before.
And we would get milk for our coffee. And if we let it sit any length of time at all, the cream would rise to the top. And it was just like this buttery, creamy deliciousness in your coffee.
It was. I got to tell you. The dairy products were quite nice. No cheese, though.
No cheese, though. Next up, probably in popularity, is seafood on both islands. The sea around the islands is just teeming with lobsters, shrimp, mussels, scallops, you name it. And we had a couple of opportunities to get some really good seafood. It's not really our go-to meal usually. I like a good bowl of mussels, and I love scallops. And you like clams.
I mean, we like seafood.
So we do like seafood, but it tends to be not really in our budget a lot, I guess.
Well, we like our money to go a long way. And even as much as we like it, and we did have it while we were there.
Oh, you have to.
Because you have to. But the other side to it is, a scallop tasted like a scallop tasted like a scallop.
Right.
So, yes, we did have it. But does it really, it's not much different. I guess when I'm traveling, I'm always looking for those dishes that are much more unique to the area. Kind of like the gash, which is like a raisin bread.
It was like a fruit cake bread.
Well, but it was mostly raisins, sultanas, whatever you want to call them. And it was really, really good. It was a little stiffer than I expected. I even bought it straight from the bakery and it was made that morning. And it was still, it's such a stiff dough that it tastes almost like it's going stale immediately, but not in a bad way. I mean, that makes it sound bad.
The crumb is really hard.
Yeah.
Not the flavor of it.
Yeah. It was delicious.
Yeah. It's really good.
And this little bakery that I went into was such a cute little thing. Jim sat in the car, which
I didn't get to go in.
Actually, it wouldn't have mattered because there's no space in there. This room, they couldn't have been larger than, like, I'm going to say 4 by 5 feet. But the thing is, it was packed full of slicers and bowls and, the shelf to hold everything. There was room for one customer and everybody else was lined out the door. Yeah. And it was so cool. I was glad to go there.
That was delicious. And we actually did end up taking that with some butter.
Yes.
Onto
some
the ferry.
Guernsey butter on some Guernsey gash.
For our ferry snack.
Yes. And that was delicious.
Next up is beans.
Now, beans make sense because, I mean, it's a hard to get to place. They're in the middle of the channel and, on bad weather, it's going to be hard to get there to resupply. So beans have always been a staple for them. And they both had the same kind of basic bean dish.
Pork and bean casserole type thing.
That they have as probably a staple or always was a staple, especially during more towards the winter months and stuff. On Jersey, it was called the Jersey bean crock. And then on Guernsey, it was called the Guernsey bean jar. And they did the ones that we tasted did have some variations in it, but they're very similar. And basically it's, a little bit of pork and bean, just like you would have in the States too. And I thought the one on Jersey was really, really, no, not the one on Jersey. The one on, the one on Jersey. I like the one on Jersey better.
At La Mer Wine Estate. And I like the one on Guernsey better at the Guernsey Pearl out by Fort Gray. And they were really good. A good hearty, like lunchtime meal with if you eat it with some good crusty bread and of course some butter, that's really the way to go. Okay. Lastly, for food, I'll just mention tea. not the
tea,
drink
and more
necessarily, but like the meal time, I guess. Tea is a well, you probably know better than I do, but tea is a drink, of course, but it's also a time where you can have either a sweet or a savory, and maybe a sandwich or a soup, or maybe a bean crock, or you can have some cake or a scone and some tea in the afternoon. So yeah, not
And
necessarily a Channel Islands thing, but one of the best sweet teas we had was at Kobo Tea House on Guernsey, where we had that lemon meringue
Oh my gosh.
slice that was pure heaven on a plate.
It really was. And that's one place, we eat at a lot of different restaurants. I mean, we travel pretty extensively, but there's few restaurants that I would almost go back to the country just for that restaurant. And this was one of them.
That's one of them. Yeah.
This little place in Guernsey had a gorgeous view. It was right across from the water. It had a just stock full of really kind of Britishy dishes that all looked amazing. Like I could have eaten there. We got there around noon, and literally I could have stayed till the whole time it was open till 6, trying different things. I mean, everything looked amazing. We will put that link in the notes.
Someone there had the bean jar, and it looked way better than the bean jar that I had just down the road. And I kind of kicked myself for not waiting for that spot.
What can you do?
But what can you do? You're going to find plenty to eat. Of course, there's international foods. We had some really great Thai food one night, a good wood-fired oven pizza one night.
There's Chinese fish and chips.
Very good food everywhere. And beer, of course. So where to stay? There are little inns and places like that, small hotels dotted all around the countryside on both islands. But really, I recommend
staying in the two bigger cities.
Capital cities. That's what we did. Make sure if you're renting a car that you've got parking included. That is a challenge in any of those cities. And if you're not, then of course you want to be near a bus stop so you can easily get out from your hotel. We stayed in the Norfolk Hotel in St. Helier, which was, I have to say, it was what I imagine a British hotel to be like, based on my experience from like way back from the 80s and in that time frame, because it didn't seem like it'd been updated
I think what you're saying is true about the islands in general, that they have a very British nostalgic feel to them.
Yeah, that's true.
Not that they're behind the times, because they weren't, and everything was done extremely well, and things were beautiful and well made and all that kind of stuff. But it just gave you this nostalgic feeling like this is what England was 20 years ago.
20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Clean. Like I said, it could have used some updates, but it was comfortable and clean. Now the restaurant, because it was such a large hotel, I would not recommend that. In fact, we would go out for breakfast, even though breakfast was included.
Yeah, the breakfast we did try the first day, and we weren't impressed.
But on Guernsey, we stayed at the Duke of Normandy, which was also right there in the capital city.
And we were impressed with their breakfast.
And that was a beautiful place and great food. The parking there was more of a challenge.
Yeah, but
we managed it every day.
That's
so
right.
It wasn't a big problem. So that's the big thing there. And we'll put a couple of links to our recommended hotels. I would stay again at the Norfolk Hotel, but knowing full well that I didn't want to eat there.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Location was great, and the parking was perfect.
And there was plenty of things around there, so we easily got out and got things to eat while we were there.
Which is why you really want to be in one of those capital cities, so that you can park your car and you can just get out and explore on foot.
I mean, we didn't do any self-catering, but I think self-catering would also have been a nice option, because there were so many farm stands and there were different things that you could try. And, when you're in a self-catering place, that means you can cook and go out to dinner. Whereas when you're in a hotel, you can only go out to dinner.
That's right. You don't have the choice.
So there is that option as well, especially if you have a car.
Well, let's run through like the top 5 things
to do on each
island real quick.
We were surprised before we do so. We were really surprised at how many things there were to do. We stayed 3 days each on each island, and we used up our time on both islands. There was enough to do to really give us, and we had a car. So if we had been biking, it would have taken us even longer to do those 3 things.
Or busing too, yeah.
Or even busing, because when you're busing, then it's harder to get between, even though the route is there, I mean, it just takes that much longer to wait for the bus, get on the bus, get off, wait
go
for
through
a
all
bus,
the stops.
that kind of thing. But for the 3 days we were there, we didn't get bored. We had plenty to do the whole time. And I mean, if we missed something, we missed it.
Good reason
we did
to go
have
back.
to make a couple of choices, but we saw the big stuff, I think.
Okay, so the first one ended up becoming our favorite castle, maybe anywhere in the world, Montargis Castle, which is on the east coast, kind of the closest point to France. And that was its whole purpose as a defensive, first line of defense against French invasion in the 13th century.
And it had been attacked over and over again.
Yeah, it had been occupied, it had been retaken, but still in alarmingly good condition overall.
Now, why was it our favorite? It was our favorite castle that we've been in a very long time because it was labyrinthian.
Yeah.
It was just a maze of ways. You leave there not sure that you've done everything.
Yeah, I'm sure we did not do everything.
There was so many ways to go, ups and downs and sideways and towers, and I don't know. It's just
down into the dungeon.
Was just, if you have that youthful feel of exploration, that was like the perfect castle for it. It was just so much fun. Now, the interior wasn't like a lot of British castles where you have tons of furniture or
artwork. Well, it had artwork, but not.
No, it had artwork.
Not your classical.
It wasn't like it wasn't
artwork.
furnished. It wasn't a furnished castle. What they did instead is they made it more into an art museum about the place. And there was some pretty cool art there, but it wasn't like a lived in castle look.
Yeah, you're not going to it to see what people lived like in that period. You're going to see it as a defensive structure and just, like you said, explore the passageways and go up and down narrow stairways and just get lost.
Now, we also love going to a museum, but the problem with museums are, and if you're a travelers like we are, we like to go to a museum, but you can only go to so many museums, especially on one trip. Like sometimes, depending on what we're doing, we're like, okay, we'll do a museum a day. Well, that's just, that gets old after a while.
If you're doing it for a lot of days.
Yeah. So anyway, but I got to tell you, we went to the Jersey Museum Art Gallery and Victorian House, and that was probably one of, I just loved it.
It's a great museum.
It was one of the best museums I definitely went to all summer. And we did a lot this summer.
Maybe in a few years.
But yeah, I could go back to that museum tomorrow and I'm sure I'd still see more things.
Yeah.
It had one whole side of it was like a Victorian house where they had to leave and they were packing up all their stuff and they were it was like all this stuff was marked for auction. And that was just kind of cool and kind of quirky. And then it had, the history of the island. And I think it was the second floor. One of the floors was all about food, straight to my heart.
Like the culinary treasures.
Oh my God, it was so good.
Evolution of food on the islands and what they did, like during occupation, how they survived, food-wise, recipes, all kinds of good stuff.
It was a great museum.
It wasn't a huge museum. It only took us a couple of hours to go through, but it was just packed full of little compartmentalized sections that were just amazingly intact. Gave you like the whole story for that time period. Yeah,
I'm going to say it's my favorite museum, at least of the summer, if not of the year.
We also went to La Hogby,
which I have to say, I wasn't.
Yeah.
This is one of those things, how so we had gotten the tourist card,
the 4-for-3 pass.
And I think we had to go to the Hogby in order to get our money's worth because one of them was closed down.
Yeah,
right?
Elizabeth Castle was closed, which would be on my top 5. But we didn't go to it, but because it was closed. But if it's open, then yeah, you have to go to Elizabeth Castle, of course.
And maybe you could skip La Hogby. Although after having gone to it, I thought it was well worth it. But before I went to it,
everybody needs to go to it.
I was like,
So it is it's
a combination site, actually. It had 3 things on the site.
Which is what makes it so fascinating. Like it's got prehistory, it's got medieval history, and it's got modern day history. And they're all on this one tiny little section of land, this one little man-made hill that's covering ancient Neolithic passage grave. So that in and of itself is super cool. But I mean, come on, how long do you need to walk into a little passage grave and go, ooh, and walk out?
But it did talk about the World War II because World War II is a big thing on those islands. And it talked about some of the prisoners in World War II in one of the bunkers. And then it also, I thought one of the coolest things was we talked about the hoard, the coins hoard. And there were lots of coins hoards. And they were just, it was just, I mean, the whole thing was a Celtic treasure. It was
fascinating place.
Really, it overachieved what I expected.
I agree. And I had the same feeling. We didn't really talk about that at all. But yeah, we had to use up the things on the pass, and that was one of them. So
and by golly, we're getting our money's worth.
Now, unfortunately, or fortunately for you listeners, it has one of the top-rated tea rooms on the island. Unfortunately for us, we had eaten right before we went, so we weren't hungry, and we didn't get a chance to go to that tea room. So we can't tell you for sure that it was the best, but it's supposed to be one of the best.
Now, the next thing that we did, which I also thought was very, extremely well done. Like I would go to this place again in a heartbeat, was the Maritime Museum. And so it was half Maritime Museum and the other half was the World War II occupation tapestry gallery. And this tapestry gallery, which is where we started first, was 12 original panels completely made out of cloth. And I love quilting. So this really speaks to me anyway. And these are like amazing pictures made out of cloth. And then they made a 13th one during one of the anniversaries. So there's actually 13 panels. And it was so well done, talking about the history of World War II, basically.
The occupation.
And then the other half of the museum was the Maritime Museum. And it was just fun. It
was a lot like a children's science museum. Because
Discovery Museum.
Discovery Museum. It was a maritime museum, so everything in it was related to
the sea,
shipping, the sea, fishing, that sort of thing. But yeah, so many different immersive activities.
There were games. There were carnival games. There were one of the things that would be really good for kids was they would have shells all over the place, which had the definitions of the words that they were using. So you had to lift the shell to find out what the answer was, and it was just so well done. And there was different parts of it. So like I said, there was really one good kind of play. Like, you start out kind of playing.
Most of the exhibits were hands-on type playing with things.
And then they had everything from knots to what would be carried in a hold of a ship to, there was one place that was so fun. It had the smells.
That was my favorite place. There was like a set of corks along a part of the ship reconstruction. And then it was to give you the smells of a journey to the East Indies or wherever. And so you'd pull one out and it'd be the rope cordage, and one would be the tar, and one would be the fish, the cod that they had to eat, salted cod. Yeah, that was really good. Probably one of my favorite museums as well. It was hard to, like, if I had to pick between the Maritime and that one, I don't know. I don't know which one I'd pick. The Maritime Museum and the Jersey Museum. I don't know which one I'd pick.
They were both very good. I mean, we only went to 2 museums.
Yeah.
On the island, and we loved both of them. How often is that?
The Jersey War Tunnels is another top place you got to go, which is basically really cool. A museum.
That's true.
But it's in this labyrinthian underground
bunker
area that was dug out by Nazi slaves during the occupation during World War II. And they've turned it into a museum about the occupation. So it covered the whole, from the beginning of the war to the end of the war.
I think we spent over 2 hours there. And I'm here to tell you, I could not read it all.
No, you couldn't.
You had to sort of pick and choose. I mean, if you had the wherewithal and the stamina, you could literally be there all day long.
Yeah, you could. Get there early if you're a strong reader and you're really fascinating in that history, because it closes at 4:30 and
they stop letting people in at 3:30 because it takes that long to get through.
That's right. So be ready for it. So those are the top 5 for Jersey. And the biggest tip here is when you go to the first one, buy the 4 for $3 Heritage Pass.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great deal. There's a couple other places if you have more time that you'd want to go to. But with that 4-for-3 pass, you can also go back to any of the ones that you visited.
I think it's good for a whole year.
Yeah, it is.
So if you happen to be there, for example, if you get there, one of the things we did, we got there pretty late in the afternoon, and we thought, well, if we want to, we can go back tomorrow. So anyway, so that was Jersey. And because we went to Jersey first, and then the second island we went to was Guernsey, and Guernsey is the one that has the movie about it.
Right.
When you get there, it doesn't seem to quite have. I don't know. It has a different personality. It is
a
different.
Totally different feel.
Well, and they are independent.
The geography is different, or the geology is different. And they're two different.
Which I didn't realize. I expected them to be exactly the same.
I did too.
Exactly.
Very similar.
Yeah. But one of the things that was different was driving on Guernsey.
Driving was a little bit different. Actually, the driving was easier on Guernsey because the roads were just a little bit bigger. They didn't have quite the same number of hedgerow, single lane drives. They still had them, but not nearly as much as what was on Jersey. But the trickiest thing for me was they didn't have a lot of roundabouts. They didn't have a lot of circles. They have them.
Filter ins.
But instead they had filters, which was kind of like open intersection that didn't have any priority for anybody. So it just went like the person to your right went, and then you just kind of zippered through.
It was very interesting.
It was a little bit. I always kind of tensed up a little bit before I hit a filter every time.
But it was interesting because here we are. I mean, we went to these two islands back to back, and they were enough different to really warrant going to both, I think.
For sure. So when you first get there, when you arrive on the ferry at St. Peter Port, you're going to go right by Castle Cornet. And that's probably the number one, I think, attraction on Guernsey.
And it's huge, and it takes a long time. And there was at least 3, if not 4 museums inside.
One about the history of the castle, of course. One about the Royal Guernsey Infantry, light infantry that took people from the island and deployed them during World War I as a unit. So it's got their history. It's got the history of the militia that has been protecting the islands from the French or other invaders since the 13th century or 14th century. And then the most interesting one, I thought, the most out of place, was the 201st Squadron Museum. And when we saw it, we thought, why do they have an air squadron museum? Because it's an air wing or air squadron.
From the UK.
From the UK. I'm like, that's kind of weird. But then you get in and you find out, and you go through this little museum, and the 201st Squadron was the oldest squadron in the RAF, and it was the last to retain a local affiliation. So you know how you hear about this, the Queen's Own or the King's Own, or in this case, Guernsey's own 201st Squadron. So they were affiliated with Guernsey from the time they were established until the time that they were decommissioned.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. Disbanded, whatever. It was a great place to wander around. It didn't hold quite as much fun for me as Orgay did.
Yeah, it's not as romantic a castle.
Yeah, because it's a castle with rooms.
It's a defensive castle.
And it had lots of museums in it. Was it great? Yes. Did I enjoy it? Yes. But it didn't quite have the allure of
Well, it's not as open, so you don't get to like scramble through the bowels of the castle.
Yeah, it was really cool. One thing that we really wanted to do, because we're big fans, we were still surprised at how flipping cool it was Victor Hugo's house.
Hauteville. Yeah.
And I mean, the whole history of it was so cool. He was basically on the run from France because he had written too many things that
the government didn't like.
The government was just not happy with. So he was exiled, and he basically exiled himself to Guernsey. He actually started on Jersey and got kicked out of there because he was just such a pain in the butt. But then he ended up on Guernsey, and he ended up being there for something like 14 years or something. Mm-hmm. A lot longer than you would expect. And while he was there, I mean, his wife went back to France, and his kids were older, and they went back to France, and he ended up being there by himself. But he was you can imagine, the eccentric old codger. And going through his house was much more interesting than maybe any house I've
than
ever
any other
been in.
historical house we visited. That's true. Well, he took it upon himself to do all of the interior designing, maybe not all the work, but definitely selecting what was going to be used to panel that wall or that fireplace, picking tapestries for the walls and the coloring schemes and the light schemes and
putting his initials everywhere.
Yeah, really fascinating. Definitely
well
must.
worth the trip.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was one of those things that wasn't included on the pass. So,
No, it was extra.
So everything we did to begin with was sort of pass oriented because we wanted to get our money's worth out of the pass. I mean, I think that goes without saying. But there were a few things that we did that were well worth doing that weren't on the pass. And I would say number one was this. So if you go to Guernsey, please visit the Victor Hugo house. It was so amazing.
Now, the only way you can visit is on a guided tour.
Right.
And you can do that online. You can set it up online. And if you're there during a high period, that's probably a really good idea. However, we were there in a pretty high period of the year.
We were.
And we were able to walk up and say, oh, sorry, we didn't know we needed to have a reservation. And they said, no problem. We'll put you on the list. The next one's in 15 minutes. Just go hang out in the garden out back. So we got to go hang out in Victor Hugo's garden out back.
I mean, who can say that?
So why not? We did talk a little bit about the Fort Gray and the Shipwreck Museum.
Just because the docent there
Yeah.
was such a character. I mean, I just loved him so much. And his family was from Guernsey. So we got so much information from him. To be honest, I mean, the Shipwreck Museum, if we hadn't talked to him, I would have loved everything about it because it was about every shipwreck that ever basically was around and told about it. And it was pretty interesting. It was on an interesting piece of land. But what made the museum for me was really the discussion we had with the docent.
Yeah, that's true. But still worth visiting, even if you don't get a chance to talk to anybody.
One of the things we really enjoyed was the German Occupation Museum. And it's a private museum, so it wasn't on the pass. But we're really glad that we went there. It was so cute. As we were going in, there was a grandma and her two grandchildren, and the little boy was dressed up as an old Tommy. And he had his little wooden gun, and he had his shorts, and I think he even had a helmet. Oh my gosh. He was probably told me he was 10 years old. I had to take a picture of him.
Too cute.
Just too darn cute. And then we went into the Occupation Museum, and it was it was surprisingly packed.
You
full
talk
of
about
information.
chock full of artifacts and information. It was quite full. And it's got a little tea room as well. But what I thought was funny,
one of the things that I thought was really cool in both islands.
Yeah.
No matter where you went, and this is sort of an aside, I realize, but whether you were at a museum or you were at
the
castle, there was always a cafe.
Yeah.
There was always a cafe. And everybody planned, like, this is what they did. They went to the Hojby, they had lunch there. They went to the castle and they had lunch there. So it was well set up no matter where you were going to have your tea or your lunch or whatever. It was cool.
Yeah.
I appreciated it.
So what I thought was funny about it was the clerk selling the tickets at the front, of course, gave us a little spiel about where to start and a little bit about the museum. And then she said, and when you get halfway through, you'll find the tea room. Now, if you want tea or if you want anything there, you just have to ring the bell and I'll come as soon as I can. If I don't have someone up here at the desk, I'll be right there. Otherwise, it might be a little bit of a wait. So, I mean, this place is such a private museum, such a small
and
operation.
It's only open a couple hours a day.
Yeah, that like she was the only person there. And other than the number of staff, there's nothing small about it.
Exactly.
I mean,
it was chock full of World War II memorabilia. It was well done. Like, I think we only had 3 hours. There's a 3-hour window to go there, 3 or 4 hours. That is it. And of course, it's not every day of the week. I'm pretty sure we'll put the hours on there. But the point is, you have to make an effort to just go there.
Get there early.
And get there so that you can see it. And there was so much to do while we were there. We were surprised.
Really good stuff. Now, my favorite.
Because it was so unexpected. That's why.
Yeah. And this is not really on anybody's list.
It's unexpected. Yeah.
Well, the candy gardens are on all the lists. And the Guernsey Museum is on the list. But attached
next to the candy gardens
on the same land is the Priaulx Library. And
how long were we there?
We spent a good hour and a half in that library.
We didn't even know about this place. We're walking to the museum and I'm like, what is that? And then we look and it says it's a library and there's placards out in the front yard, with different postcards from Guernsey.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, I'm sure if I had looked it up, it would have been there, but it wasn't something that is easy to find out about beforehand,
No.
or at least it wasn't for us. It was a surprise.
I don't think I've ever seen it on any tourist list.
Yeah. Well, at any
in
rate,
all the research I've done and everything,
we couldn't stop ourselves. We had to go in.
and it is a just gorgeous, mid 19th century house where this man Priot lived and had his collections, and he donated it on his death to the city with the requirement that all of his collections and house be turned into a library that's free for everybody to use. And so that's what it is. It's a free library. You can come in. It's got his collected books. It's, of course, brought together collections from other places. The house itself is amazingly beautiful, but the library is full of these
ancient
old books,
volumes
that you can just pull off the shelf and peruse.
Yeah, it was way cool. And so while we were there, you could go up and watch a movie. They had film strips. I asked the lady, she's like, do you need any help? And I said, well, sure. I'm looking for old cookbooks,
from the
local
island.
cookbooks, because Guernsey and Jersey are kind of out of the way. They're not, they're kind of British, but they're not really British. They're kind of French, but they're not really French. And so I was like, well, there's got to be some good recipes. And we'd had some local foods that we had heard about, but I knew there'd be more. So she goes, and just like you would expect of any great librarian, she pulls me out. I think I had a stack of 10 books, didn't I? And so I sat there for a good, probably 45 minutes going through and finding recipes that were specific and reading old books about cooking while we were there. And it was just really, really cool. Everything about this library, we loved it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I really loved about it was, as you were walking in, there was a little sign, I think mainly for kids, but kids of all ages, I would say, that had a scavenger hunt. So there is little thumbnails of blown up parts of things in the library that you could go around and try to find. So that was really cool. But definitely stop in there and just sit in an old leather chair and look at some really old manuscripts for a little bit. Soak up the history.
And it's free.
The museum itself down in Candy Gardens, wasn't my favorite museum.
It wasn't my favorite museum. If we hadn't been comparing it to what we had on Jersey, we might have liked it better. There were some really cool parts to that museum. It had about witches in the islands,
folklore and that
folklore, and
that
it
part
had
was
some cool stuff.
Really
it did
excellent.
have some cool stuff. We were just a little bit, I think, expecting more when we went.
Yeah, and the gardens themselves, they're beautiful gardens. They've got the oldest hot houses in the British Isles, or heated glass houses in the British Isles. Beautiful gardens just to wander around and maybe have a little picnic and enjoy yourselves. For us, it was just around the corner from our hotel. So it was a really good place to just go and relax. But that library there was the hidden gem.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, I have to say, Jim and I have wanted to go to the Channel Islands really for quite some years, for at least, I don't know, I'm going to say at least a decade. And we've talked about it, but it's not the easiest thing to get to.
It's really not.
You have to sort of make an effort to get there. But there are flights, there are ferries. We recommend the ferry just because we enjoyed it so much. And I have to say, after having gone, I just loved both of them. And they both have their distinct personality.
Right. Well, I'm ready to go back.
Right.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Streets and Eats. If you liked what you heard, please show us some love, hit the like button, and leave us a review. Maybe even subscribe so you don't miss any future podcasts. Also, we'd love it if you joined us on our Facebook private group, Streets and Eats, where we just have an ongoing conversation about all things travel. Ciao for now.